or indeed if any of them might be leaving you exposed. And you know, that's never been more important, because as cases of data and identity theft continue to hit the headlines, knowing that your details are being kept safe is absolutely essential.
Truly essential. Now, we'll also be hearing from people who, very sadly, have first-hand experience of having their personal information stolen. And as a result, they've been left thousands of pounds out of pocket. So as well as highlighting where some of the businesses we entrust our details to could actually be doing better, we'll also have very clear advice on what you can do to make sure that your money is going where you want it to, rather than straight into the hands of criminals.
Coming up, how it's easier than ever for criminals to buy bank account details for just a few pounds online. Could your data be up for sale?
There's my full name, my address, my maiden name. Even the security pin on the back of the card is there.
And how safe is your cash? As scams hit a record high, our experts reveal which banks they reckon have the best security.
How did you make that happen?
We couldn't put anything as a sender, so it drops into exactly the same message thread as genuine SMS text messages from your bank.
Now to a story that's likely to get all of us double-checking our bank accounts for any unusual activity. Because despite companies having to tighten up on how they look after all our personal information, identity theft has become the crime of choice for fraudsters who go on to use your details to take out credit, plunder your savings, and even arrange loans in your name. Now, not long ago, our valuable details could only really be bought and sold by criminals who ventured onto hidden parts of the internet, the so-called dark web. But I'm afraid that's no longer the case. It's all pretty scary. So if you want to make sure that your personal details are not being used and abused, then get ready for some advice that these days, frankly, none of us can afford to ignore. Changing your passwords, not sharing personal details online, and keeping your posts safe. All advice that we're told will help prevent our identity being stolen. But as we've reported before, even when you've put all of that into practice, determined criminals can still buy and sell sensitive personal information online, provided they know where to look. In the past, we've highlighted how frequently that happens on what is usually called the dark web, one of the most sinister parts of the internet that doesn't show up on search engines, and where crimes are committed and information traded without the people responsible being easily traced.
96% of the internet is hidden, and in that 96% there's a belief that there's a lot of criminality happening.
But since then, fraudsters have crawled out of the shadows of the dark web and are now openly trading these sorts of details in broad daylight on the everyday parts of the internet used by you and me. And the information that they're buying is one of the reasons being blamed for a massive spike in identity fraud, 175,000 cases in 2017 alone. Someone who's discovered the hard way just how easy it is for criminals to use your personal details to steal your identity is Rosemarie from Swindon. But the first she knew of it was when she spotted mysterious payments coming out of her bank account.
It all started with direct debits. That's the first thing that would come out, the odd direct debit for a mobile bill. Direct debits in my account for gym memberships, coming out 2-3 months in a row until I really noticed it.
Baffled as to what was going on, Rosemarie contacted the companies who'd been taking the money to explain that none of these transactions had been set up or authorized by her.
The bank told me which company it was, and they gave me the number, so I contacted that company themselves, and they then said to me, oh, it could have been someone just inputted their wrong account number to set up the direct debit, so it could have been a mistake at first. But then this same direct debit happened again 2-3 months later. Then I said, how can it be a mistake? So someone's actually using my account.
And one letter in particular that Rosemarie received confirmed her fears.
That morning that I got the post, I opened it when I saw that it was actually a loan application and it was pre-approved for 5,000. I was like, whoa.
Rosemarie immediately got onto the company through which the loan had been taken out and cancelled the application. But by now she was feeling very uncomfortable about who could be using her details in this way.
Why is someone targeting you? Why is someone targeting, your income, your account. Why are they trying to do these things to you? And you're thinking, you know, when is this going to stop?
Well, I'm afraid it didn't stop. Almost 2 years after they began, Rosemary is still getting letters about bank cards, loan applications and subscriptions, all taken out in her name.
It's got me on edge. I am literally checking my account every day, and it's not a nice feeling to actually think, oh, I have to check. I have to make sure there's sufficient money there to pay my bills and that there isn't anything going out for someone else.
Every time Rosemary spots an unknown payment, she has to ring her bank and get it stopped.
Ryan calling regarding my online banking.
And despite changing her passwords, email address and other details associated with her bank accounts, the fraudulent activity continues. Not only is this stressful, but her credit rating has been damaged by all this activity that's appeared on her account. So simply changing bank accounts and starting again is not an option.
I want to change the bank, but I can't until I get my credit history cleared. I can't do anything about that at the moment.
As well as being frustrated at being unable to stop what was happening, Rosemary remains perplexed as to how fraudsters were so easily able to get a hold of the information that's required to take out all of this credit in her name. By Rosemary's reckoning, around £7,000. The bank suggested that she check what information could be found about her online, and if necessary, try and remove anything that fraudsters could exploit. When Rosemary did as she was advised, she was horrified by what she discovered was available on one particular website.
There's my full name, my address, my maiden name, my date of birth, my email, my mobile number, account number, sort code, my bank card, even the security pin on the back of the card is being there. And to look at that site and see all of your details just listed down, it'll send anybody mad. And at the cost of just paying £4.
For about the same price as a pint, Rosemary's most sensitive information was being traded online via a website that any one of us could access.
To actually have somebody selling your details like that, it's not a nice feeling, and it makes one feel really, really angry. You wake up, you go to sleep and you wake up and you're thinking, when is it going to end? I just want it to end, to be honest.
And her concerns are shared by those at the forefront of fighting cybercrime like this. Fraud Prevention Service, CIFAS, recently said there's no doubt that the trading of information like this via easily accessible websites was fueling an identity theft epidemic. And the prevalence of websites like the one on which Rosemary's data was being sold is a real worry for our technology expert, David McClelland.
When I look at Rosemary's story, it breaks my heart really to think that she is virtually being stalked by these scammers day in, day out, and really it's taken over her life. So how has she got in this position?
Well, the answer is this has happened through no fault of her own. Somehow her personal information has made its way onto the World Wide Web, and anyone can find that kind of information just using a simple search term. All I've done just here is type in one word, and this is one of these slang terms that criminals will look for, and instantly I've got dozens and dozens of hits here of pages that have got people's personal information. This has got a name, a date of birth, a mother's maiden name, a national insurance number, telephone number, address, bank card number, the PIN, the card verification code. If you wanted everything, the full information of an individual, $35.
So you're telling me for $35 you could get all the information about a person like Rosemary, any of us?
You could get all the information that you would need to commit potential identity fraud, to take over her identity and start taking out credit in her name.
Well, when we put Rosemary's case to Google, the search engine through which she'd found the website selling her details, it told us that when it receives reports of pages of this nature, it removes them from search, full stop. But when we checked for ourselves shortly after that, Rosemary's information was still on sale on the same site where she'd seen it listed. And perhaps that's no surprise. However hard the companies behind search engines may work to try and tackle fraud, once your details are already out there, they can be very difficult indeed to completely remove. which is why cybersecurity expert Matt Lashley says it's crucial that we're all much more careful about how much information we inadvertently divulge online in the first place.
There's a common game online where people take their first pet's name and their mother's maiden name, they join them together and it creates this pseudonym name. What people don't realise is by putting this information out on the internet is that they've just given out the answers to two of the most popular security questions when you are faced with forgetting your password from an account or a platform.
Getting hold of those kinds of detail could be all that a hacker with your email address needs. By hitting the forgot password box and answering a few questions, access to all the information in your inbox could be just a few clicks away.
You need to start looking at your own personal security and need to see if you can make any changes. For example, update your antivirus software, make sure that your passwords have been changed, and make sure that they're stored in a secure place and that you're not using the same password across multiple different platforms and accounts.
All of that is advice that we hear a lot, but how many of us still haven't followed it through? And of course, sometimes your details may be compromised, not because you've been careless, but because a company that you've dealt with in some way has been hacked. And with some big names like Facebook, British Airways, and credit rating agency Equifax, the company recently fined £500,000 for failing to protect the personal data of 15 million people. It's worth checking if your details aren't at risk of falling into the hands of fraudsters. And Matt says there's an easy way to do that.
Would be to check a website called haveibeenpwned.com. This is a website that collates all the data breaches and puts them into one big database. You can put your email address into it, hit search, and it will tell you if that has been part or registered to one of the major data leaks when they've occurred.
However your details have ended up being available to scammers, the consequences can rumble on for some time. As Rosemarie, still dealing with the repercussions of her data having been sold online, knows better than most.
I feel they've turned my life upside down, having to have to do things that I never used to do, and I just want it all to stop.
In practically every series of Rip-Off Britain, we hear from people who've experienced real heartbreak and been left thousands of pounds out of pocket after being targeted by fraudsters posing as someone from their bank. And though the exact details may differ each time, what's usually key to the success of such scams is the way they manage to exploit how banks communicate with their customers. So you might very well wonder what exactly the banks are doing to tackle this and to make sure that they stay one step ahead of the fraudsters. Well, we've been taking a closer look at that, and it's clear that some of them seem to come out rather better in the security stakes than others. So let's see how your bank shapes up. Time and again, you've told us about the truly sickening moment when you realised that you've fallen for a scam that's left you thousands of pounds out of pocket.
Just burst into tears. It's all gone. The money's all gone.
With little or no chance of ever getting your money back.
They basically completely sort of bombed me off. There's no way we'll get this money back.
And perhaps the worst of it is that no matter how convincing the scam, how clever the deceit, all too often, as far as the banks are concerned, if you fell for it, it's you that's to blame.
I feel completely let down by the bank. And it's very easy for them to say, no, it's your responsibility. You pushed the buttons.
Earlier this year, we reported on the case of Brian Busby from Nottingham. He lost £15,000 to fraudsters after receiving what he believed was a genuine text message from his bank, Santander, asking him to contact the bank's fraud department urgently on a phone number provided in the text. It looked utterly convincing, but it was a scam and ultimately led to Brian being tricked into handing over his bank account details and his savings to criminals.
I was so convinced. You would have to be a total idiot if there was any doubt in my mind that I was not speaking to Santander Fraud Department. Why on God's earth would I have sat there and given out those details? You just would not do it, would you?
Well, you can certainly see his point, but the bank, though sympathetic, repeated an argument that's become all too familiar to victims of scams like this one. Because Brian had unwittingly authorised the transaction to the fraudsters, the responsibility for the loss lay squarely on his shoulders, so the bank wouldn't be refunding his money. And when he took his complaint to the Financial Ombudsman Service, it agreed with that decision. But what's made the whole ordeal even harder for Brian to come to terms with is just how easy it was for the fraudsters to exploit the way in which his bank communicates with him via text in order to carry out their crime.
Now, if they were aware that this was happening, why have neither themselves nor the phone companies found a way to prevent this happening? I don't think the banks do enough.
Brian's convinced that, given the prevalence of such scams, the banks should be revising the ways in which they get in touch with their customers. And that's a view shared by some industry experts, including Luke Putter from ethical hacking company SureCloud. His company has been calling for banks to toughen up their security processes around emails, phone calls, and of course, texts. We've asked him to meet Brian to see if he can shed a little more light on his case.
Right, nice to meet you.
Do you have with you the phone, please, that had the spoof message on?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Okay.
Luke very quickly demonstrates that using software readily available online, he's easily able to send a text to Brian's phone that looks as though it's from his bank.
So now I have just received a text message that's come in underneath all the rest of my Santander text messages, so it looks perfectly genuine. So how did you make that happen?
And so what we've done is we've effectively performed a smishing attack on you. The key point being that we can put anything as a sender. So we could put it from the Queen, Mr. Blobby, Santander, whoever it may be. So it drops into exactly the same message thread as genuine SMS text messages from your bank.
It was a very similar text that convinced Brian to hand over sensitive details and led to him losing thousands of pounds. And it's to stop others losing out in the same way that explains why Luke would like to see banks ditch communicating with customers by text message altogether.
So SMS is quite an old technology now, and is not seen as a best practice way genuinely industry to communicate. There are what we would consider more secure ways, for example, via push notifications in mobile applications. It's a lot more technically difficult to fraudulently do a push notification than it is a text message.
Okay, 'cause I'm surprised to hear that, because I'd always thought until this happened that SMS messaging was quite secure.
Well, apparently not. In fact, Luke reckons that if banks stopped using text messages and instead sent alerts and notifications straight to an app on your smartphone, it would go a long way towards eliminating all spoofing and smishing scams. Such notifications are particularly hard to hack into, so they're a much more secure way to communicate with customers. As yet, the only bank to solely use this way of getting in touch is new kid on the block Monzo, a digital-only bank that launched its current accounts in 2017. And for Luke, it's a no-brainer that the rest should follow suit.
One recommendation we would make to all organisations out there is where you are communicating and conversing with your customer base or your clients, look to use secure messaging communications where possible.
But communicating with customers is only part of how banks keep our money safe. And Luke believes that some of them could do with beefing up their security measures as a whole in order to stay one step ahead of the scammers. To prove his point, he and his team are going to compare the online systems of 10 UK banks to see how well they each stack up when it comes to protecting customers against fraud.
The exercise we will be performing today is assessing the security features and options available to consumers when using their online banking platforms. We've come up with a series of tests that we can perform consistently across all of the banks and with all of the volunteers today, looking at everything from login to encryption to account management to things like navigation and log out, and then scoring them accordingly.
Our 10 volunteers from the Ripoff Britain production team are each with a different bank. Luke and his team will assess each bank's security in several key areas, then decide which one comes out best overall. First off, they're looking at logging in.
So if you could please log in as you normally would, please.
And the banks that impress him most are First Direct, Barclays, Nationwide and once again Monzo, all of whom require what's called two-factor authentication to access an online account. It means an extra check, such as a fingerprint or a passcode sent to your mobile, is needed to log in. And it's an additional layer of security that he thinks all the banks should use.
If someone got your username and password, they wouldn't be able to get into your full account because they'd need that second code.
Next, the team is assessing how the various banks encrypt the personal information sent to customers online so that no one can get their hands on the data being transmitted. And from the tests that Luke carried out, on this one, it was Santander that came out top, followed swiftly by Monzo, TSB and Halifax. The cooperative bank scored less well, which Luke says is because it allows customers to connect to its site using older operating systems, which can mean it's more vulnerable to being hacked.
Thank you. That concludes that area of testing.
Luke and his team then examined what security features are in place whenever there's a new transaction on an online account.
If when you're logged in, if you just go to your payee screen for me, please.
Best practice is for the bank to send a notification if a new payee has been set up, which could be a vital first sign of fraudulent activity. NatWest, Nationwide, Halifax, TSB and Santander all rated highly here, always notifying customers when a new payee is set up, but they do it by text. So once again, it was online-only bank Monzo, which does everything through its secure app, that impressed Luke the most.
Immediately that the transaction was made, you've got a notification. So not an SMS, a push notification to your phone and to your app. So if someone had accessed your Monzo account by some other means, for example, you would know immediately that the transaction was made.
Finally, our experts looked at what happens when it comes to logging out. Luke says banks with the best security will automatically log customers out once they've been inactive for some time, and only one person should be able to log in at the same time, say from a different device. In his opinion, coming out best on this were First Direct, HSBC, Halifax, TSB, Santander and Monzo.
Great, it's showing that you've been logged out for security reasons, so that's a good practice.
And when all these results are put together, there's one bank that Luke says came out best for online security overall, the online-only one, Monzo.
Monzo have scored very highly. That's because, for example, when they communicate with their customers, it's all done via push notifications through the app, which is seen as a secure method of communicating. They're not using things like SMS text messaging to alert of changes to accounts, payees being added, money being transferred and transactions taking place, which in the industry is seen as good practice.
But right behind this new player, in joint second place, were a couple of more established names, First Direct and Barclays.
Well, the ones that have come out on top have a wider array of security features available and enforced on the users of the online platform. So, for example, they are enforcing things like two-factor authentication. They're enforcing strong passwords.
Reassuringly, Luke says the security of all the banks was good. So, although there were three that in his tests came out the lowest, TSB, HSBC, and finally the cooperative bank, it doesn't mean that they have a problem, just that their rivals are leading the way.
The ones in the bottom three, for example, either don't have two-factor authentication available, or maybe it's not available by default and has to be enabled by the user, or maybe the password policies are weaker than others and not encouraging strong and best practice amongst the users of their sites.
Well, all the banks assured us that security is a key priority, with robust and sophisticated processes in place to protect consumers. Of the ones that didn't do as well in Luke's tests, the cooperative bank said it was disappointed, but told us it's already delivered improvements to its encryption since this research was done, and it has plans to launch a new mobile app to strengthen its online security further. HSBC says it uses state-of-the-art technology to deter and detect financial crime, adding that it's never complacent and constantly reviews its security measures to keep customers' money safe at all times. Likewise, TSB told us that it deploys complex and multi-layered fraud and security technologies around the clock, both visible and behind the scenes. The banks were also at pains to say that 2/3 of all attempted fraud is stopped by their systems, And where that doesn't happen, it's often because customers have been tricked into giving away their details, as was the case with Brian, who's now asked a financial investigator to see if there's any way of getting any of his money back.
At the time, it was painful, it was traumatic, but as time's gone by, I've got over that. So hopefully, looking forward to the future, it may be a positive result, but I'm not exactly holding my breath for that at the moment.
Still to come on Rip-Off Britain, the fraud that's left people like this woman being pursued for debts they don't owe.
When I raised to them that I feel like you're forcing me to pay a criminal's loan, and they just carried on persisting, they didn't back down.
Our annual pop-up shop is always a great opportunity for us to meet as many of you as we can. And of course, for you to get some free consumer advice from our top team of experts. Victoria Womby from Oldham has come to see Sylvia Rook from Trading Standards after having trouble with a major purchase.
Victoria, you bought a second-hand car. You've had problems ever since. Tell me what happened.
I have. So about a month after I bought it, there was a problem. I bought it 10th of January. And then exactly a month later, 10th February, I had a problem, wouldn't start. So I tried myself, I got a new battery, got a new starter motor, still wouldn't work. Took it to an approved dealer who did a diagnostic and said the engine is seized. It'll be about £5,000 to repair. That was just a rough estimate. I rang the garage back and said, I've looked into my rights, I can have a refund, a repair or a replacement, and he wouldn't offer any. He says, no, I'm not going to fix it for you.
Sylvia, what do you reckon?
It's a bit of a mess, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you had the first fault, what you should have done is gone back to the garage and even if it was a flat battery, because you have rights when you buy a car that it should be of satisfactory quality.
Yeah.
But even though Victoria slightly muddied the waters by fitting a new battery and starter motor herself, Sylvia still reckons the car shouldn't have needed any of this work carried out so soon after purchase. She thinks Victoria should carry on fighting her corner.
So I think no matter how much they've been fobbing you off, the fact is the law is on your side, clearly, from what you've heard.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, well.
You have to persevere, but stick with it because the law is on your side.
Oh, that's reassuring. Thanks so much, I appreciate that.
Well, Victoria has now taken her case to the small claims court in the hope that the garage that sold her the car will finally take some responsibility. Meanwhile, over in our gripe corner, plenty more of you couldn't wait to tell us about the things that leave you feeling totally cheesed off.
Photography, the special offer gets you in through the door, and then you get presented with wonderful pictures. You want them all, and you get the hard sell at the end. It's just far too expensive.
Really fed up with paying car tax, with the, especially with the state of the roads. Loads of potholes, so fix our roads, please.
We've talked a lot in this programme about the consequences of your personal details being stolen and then used to apply for all sorts of credit. Not only could you be left to clear up the damage done to your credit file, but you could even find yourself held liable for any outstanding debt. So for most of us, promises by lenders to tighten up their checks when loading out cash couldn't have come soon enough. But from what you've been telling us, there's a lot of doubt over whether those checks are actually going far enough. And when you hear just how easy it was for a criminal to get away with borrowing hundreds of pounds using false details, you may well have the same concerns. The first sign that something is worryingly amiss might be when a letter demanding payment for a loan you've never heard of drops through your letterbox. Or you get a call from an unknown number asking why you've defaulted on your payments. Being chased for arrears is never nice, but it's even worse when you know for sure that the debt is not yours. And that's exactly what happened to Cara Nelson from Essex. She was horrified when she received a letter out of the blue from a company called Quick Quid for a £150 payday loan that she knew she hadn't taken out.
I called the number straight away and they said they were part of Quick Quid's collections department and that I had a loan with them and that I hadn't paid anything back and that I needed to pay them immediately. I obviously was really shocked, didn't know what to do, asked them for some advice. They just said that I needed to pay the loan.
Although Cara asked to speak to the company's fraud department, she felt that rather than listening to her protest of innocence, QuickQuid's only interest was in getting its money back.
And I felt really lost and alone. I just felt really stressed trying to figure this out. I had no idea about any of it. They kept telling me that I passed their credit checks, so the fault wasn't with them, it was with me. When I asked them to look into it, they said that they had looked into it and that they had no evidence that I wasn't complicit in the fraud.
Cara's confusion only deepened when she asked the company to explain exactly what details the person taking out the loan would have needed to provide.
QuickQuid told me that the information used was my name, what they believed to be my address, and a bank account that was linked to myself. I was really shocked that with such little information they could gain an account.
It soon transpired that the address the fraudsters had used was a previous one that Cara no longer lived at. What's more, the bank account in her name, which the loan had been paid into, was with Nationwide, a bank that Cara had never been with in her life.
I'm the victim of identity fraud, and they just kept saying that I couldn't prove that I was the victim of identity fraud. They kept telling me that I needed to provide my bank statements. Obviously, it wasn't my bank account, so I couldn't produce bank statements for an account I'd never seen before. They said that I had no proof that the account wasn't in my name, therefore I had to pay it.
Despite her insistence that the loan was nothing to do with her, the company continued to pursue Cara for the money.
QuickQuid were very relentless, making me feel like I had no choice but to pay the loan that I knew I hadn't taken out just to get them off my back. And when I raised to them that I feel like you're forcing me to pay a criminal's loan, and they just carried on persisting, they didn't back down.
Cara said she didn't fare much better when she spoke to Nationwide. She says the bank told her that it couldn't confirm whether she had been a victim of identity fraud, although it did agree to close the account whilst it investigated whether or not it was fraudulent.
I told them that I needed a letter from them as there was companies chasing me for this loan money. They said I'd hear back from them. I never heard back from them. A month later, I decided to call them again to chase this up. They said they had no knowledge of my original call. They didn't know anything about the incident at all.
Nationwide next suggested she take identification into one of its branches and sort it all out there. But that didn't seem to resolve things in quite the way she'd expected either.
I said, this is my address, this is my phone number. Anyone else trying to contact you is not myself. A few weeks passed, no call back from them, nothing. I then called them again. They said they had no knowledge of me going into the branch, even though I had a letter signed by the person that I spoke to thank me for coming into the branch with my identification.
Then, to add insult to injury, when Cara discovered the reason why she hadn't heard anything back from Nationwide, she says it was because the bank was sending all its correspondence to the address and phone numbers that the criminals had used to set up the scam account in the first place.
So they were also sending letters to the other person who was pretending to be me.
Feeling she was getting nowhere, Cara went to the Financial Ombudsman and is now waiting for the results of the investigation into her case. But she's been left astonished at just how easy it was for criminals to fraudulently take out a payday loan in her name.
I think these payday companies are missing a lot of checks out. As long as you have an email address, name, and an address that you're linked to, you're able to obtain small amounts of payday loans.
Well, we put all of those points to QuickQuid, and I'm glad to report that the loan that was fraudulently taken out in Cara's name has now been cancelled, and the company says that all information relating to it has been removed from credit reports. It went on to describe this as a very sophisticated fraud, made particularly difficult to identify, because whoever was responsible had been able to set up a fraudulent bank account. The company said it appreciates that resolving such frauds is time-consuming and burdensome for the individual, and is constantly working on ways to make it less so. As for Nationwide, it told us it sympathises with Cara's situation, but it doesn't believe it could have known she had been a victim of fraud until she told them, as the account had been opened in line with all the correct processes and regulations. It said once it had investigated and it was clear what was going on, it promptly closed the account, wrote off the overdrawn balance and corrected her credit file. It also offered £50 compensation for the delay in providing her with the letter confirming that she had been the victim of fraud. But the ease with which criminals seem to be able to bypass companies' security checks in order to take out loans is reckoned by experts to have led to a huge jump in the number of frauds of this nature. And it's an area that is of particular concern to personal finance expert Sarah Pennells.
Payday lenders really thrive on being able to offer that money quickly. Now, there's an argument to be had about whether or not that's a good thing, but if they are going to do that, then they should make sure that fraudsters aren't able to exploit it as widely as they have done in the past. There are two things that the payday lenders could be doing better. One is making sure that they really check that the person who's applying for the loan is who they say they are and can afford it. And secondly, when fraud occurs, they should be quicker at spotting it, because what I've seen, the number of people who've become victims of fraud through payday loan companies have a real problem then trying to sort it out afterwards.
As it was for Cara, and that's certainly been the case for Vicky Taylor from Essex. In September 2017, she received an unexpected letter from a payday loan company called Lending Stream, asking her for nearly £700 to repay a loan she'd supposedly taken out 4 months earlier.
I've never heard of the Lending Stream, never heard of them before. So it was a complete mystery. And I just thought, well, I just simply didn't do this. Who are these people?
Confused, but certain that a mistake had been made, Vicky immediately got on the phone to Lending Stream to sort the situation out.
I was just not getting through to anybody. Nobody could help me. And they kept telling me I'd have to ring back at another time. I was put on hold. I was hung up on mid-conversation. The person I needed to speak to was apparently never there.
Getting nowhere, Vicky reported the case to Action Fraud. It told her that she'd most likely been the victim of an ID fraud, with a scammer using her details to take out a payday loan in her name. But in order to get the debt cleared, Vicky would need to get Lending Stream's fraud department to investigate the case as well, something that was proving to be easier said than done.
I phoned the Lending Stream and tried to tell them that I just was not the person that they thought that I was. I was not somebody who owed them money, that somebody had obviously done this fraudulently in my name. And all the time they treated me like that they didn't believe me, and as if I was making the whole thing up and trying to throw them off the scent.
After weeks of toing and froing, Vicky eventually managed to get through to somebody at Lending Stream who could help. And while they confirmed that a loan had been taken out fraudulently in her name, Vicky was shocked to hear how little information the scammers would have needed to have opened up the loan in the first place.
They said that all the person would have needed to have taken out a loan was the name, the date of birth and a postal address. So whoever pretended to be me also had a different bank account, also had a different email address and also had a different telephone number. And how anyone can take a loan out with only that information is quite surprising.
After much persistence and reporting the crime to the police, Vicky managed to persuade Lending Stream that she didn't owe a penny, but she was horrified when sometime later her application for credit to buy a new laptop was declined.
I finally thought that it was all over and done with. I'd done everything that I needed to do, but it wasn't, unfortunately, because my credit rating plummeted.
After complaining to the Financial Ombudsman Service, her credit rating eventually returned to normal. But Vicky is adamant that the payday loan company should have done more to prevent the scammers from taking out a loan in her name.
I totally blame the Lending Stream for allowing this to happen. It was just so easy for somebody to set this loan up fraudulently and for it to be abused. And I know it's what they trade on, being able to offer people money quickly, in a hurry, but it's just too easy to abuse.
Well, I have to tell you that several times we've contacted Lending Stream to ask about Vicky's case and the checks it carries out to make sure that applicants for loans aren't fraudulent. As yet, it hasn't got back to us. As we heard earlier in the programme, the ease with which our personal details can be bought and sold online means it can be relatively straightforward for fraudsters to get hold of the info they need to take out a loan. But we don't have to make it too easy for them. So think carefully about what information you make available, for example, on social media. In particular, keep your date of birth to yourself, however nice it is to get hold of those birthday wishes. But whilst we've all got a part to play in beating the fraudsters, Sarah Pennells believes that to stop them altogether, there needs to be further action to force payday loan companies to up their game.
I'd like to see tougher rules, because at the moment their systems are very good at selling loans and getting money into people's accounts quickly, but it seems that they haven't maybe invested in the same way in systems to make sure that fraudsters can't exploit any loopholes.
And of course, it's fair to say, Cara would agree with that.
I just felt really upset and let down by them. I expected more from companies like that there'd be more safety precautions in place to protect myself and my identity.
Ripoff Britain wouldn't be here without your stories, and we've got plenty of ways you can get in touch. You can send us an email to ripoffbritain@bbc.co.uk, or you can write to us at Ripoff Britain, BBC Dockhouse, Media City UK, Salford, M50 2LH. But please do not send any original documents. And even if you haven't got a story you would like us to investigate, you can always join in the conversation on our Facebook page. Just search BBC Ripoff Britain.
Well, we're almost out of time for today, but I think it's clear we've all got to take a share of the responsibility when it comes to keeping our money safe. After hearing again what Brian has been through, it really is true. You can never be too careful.
But, you know, as we've said so many times on this programme, it's simply not enough for the banks to shift all the responsibility onto us, their customers. After all, very often it is the bank's own procedures that the fraudsters are seemingly finding it so easy to exploit.
Well, you can bet that this is definitely a subject we'll be returning to in the programme. But in the meantime, let's just repeat 2 absolutely key pieces of advice. First of all, remember your bank will never, ever ask you to transfer money to anyone. And secondly, always be on your guard as to who you reply to via text or email. And if there's any doubt whatsoever over who has been in touch with you, close all conversations down and contact your bank from a completely different number. They'll soon tell you if anything's wrong. And on that note, that's where we leave it. But obviously, we've enjoyed your company.